Mike LaRusso is a sales innovator and industry veteran who's been featured on NBC, CBS News, and Fox News. He's an expert in securing new accounts, leveraging data insights, and leading transformative ventures. He draws on his 4 decades of sales experience and shares his insights in his book, The Sales Professional's Survival Guide, a blueprint for tactical prospecting. Here to unleash our sales potential, please welcome to the podcast, Mike LaRusso. Welcome to the Engaging Personalities Podcast. I'm Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, where we're on a mission to rehumanize business through engagement. We believe that we can all be more successful if we can command attention and deepen connection. So stick around to the end of the show and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest on a future episode. So let's get ready to engage. Mike, welcome.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Anders. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. So Mike, let's, I touched on a little bit in the intro. You've been in sales for a long time. You've learned a lot of things over the
Unfortunately,
years.
you touched on the 4 decades, but I have to deal with that.
It's authority, it's credibility, right? You are
good way to look at it.
A subject matter expert. That's why you're on the podcast.
Right. Okay.
Let's just kind of go back. How did you get started in sales? Like what drew you to it in the first place?
I live in Atlanta. I've been down here 20 years, but I'm originally a New York market person. Grew up there. I was a bicycle messenger when I was 15, did a lot of sales work, a lot of jobs in Manhattan, but you really do get your sales legs working in Manhattan. And it has generally a business development mindset to it. So, I don't like using the term natural born salespeople, but there are certain types of people with a business development mindset where it's in their fiber to do deals. And I think I'm one of those people because I'll be honest with you, I'm a double major in psychology and marketing. So, and I didn't want to go into, I figured I could be one of these intelligent people who could speak for a living, without having to sell something. But it just, the moment I graduated, I went back into sales and I've been in it for 40 years. And, so I think it's just the nature of the beast.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting when you think about, when you say New York, automatically I have this kind of like hustle culture kind of feel that, and also the concrete jungle, right? Survival of the fittest, and you're just kind of doing what you got to do. So you're kind of a product of your environment in a lot of ways there.
Yes. And real brief story. When I was one of my first sales gigs in New York, we had the products that we carried in a briefcase, and every briefcase was about 5 inches wide. But when I started, they only had a 3-inch case left. So I couldn't fit my binder in there. So I had to carry it with me, and it became annoying carrying it separately. So I went to a hardware store. I got a couple of 4 hooks. I glued them to the outside, and I created like my own little sleeve for it on the outside of the case. And no less than a dozen times, just walking in New York, being in elevators, standing at stoplights, people you don't know come up to you and say, "You got to patent that." Well, that's a great idea. I know how to expand on it. And one person actually said, "Here, call my friend Joe. He runs the Samsonite office on 34th Street. He'll have some ideas." So it just shows you the mentality. And I didn't know any of these people. They just come up to you and want to do business. It's nature of the beast.
So I mean, I don't want to go down this too far.
I know.
But I do. There is something, Mike, that is kind of that people are willing to stop you, interrupt you, and there's something about that kind of go get 'em attitude. And do you think that is New York specific, or is it just kind of
100%? And
okay.
Again, we're going down a rabbit hole, but briefly.
Yeah.
New York, when the cities were formed and the country was being formed and people moved and went to Philadelphia or all these different cities, New York was the only city that was formed based on doing business. Other places had, they wanted to form a new religion or they wanted some separation of independence. New York, probably because of the location being right at the heart of the Hudson into the Atlantic. Yeah. So everyone there was just, we're here to do business. And it carried on for 400 years.
Well, it's a badge of honor anyways, being from New York, and New York salesperson and that. So I want to touch on something that I saw when I was kind of doing my research, and there's myths and misconceptions in selling. And, whether or not we kind of just, like there's lots of sayings, that you have, and maybe they get perpetuated through time. But I'm just
Yes.
wondering, what are some of these, maybe, I don't know if they were ever best practices, but they're no longer relevant. What are some things that have changed that, you want to put a stop to?
You're being kind with myths, the term myths, because it's really the title of the book is Survival Guide, and that's financial survival. So it's a very serious look at some of these things that are forced upon sales professionals that no longer work and haven't changed in years and years and years. Some of them, and you've heard these, I'm sure, as it relates to prospecting, which is the main crux of the book, is, you have to make 100 calls a day or knock on 100 doors a day, these types of things. And the cold calling aspect as a repetitive randomization still gets perpetuated and is not productive at all, and it wastes time and destroys organizations and sales professions. And just as a side note, the profession of sales has the highest turnover of any profession. And it's because that type of unchanging belief, instead of changing the methodology, they change the perspective of the methodology. And they say, well, if you can't do what we're telling you, we'll get somebody else to do it. And they just, turn the spigot. So the biggest one as it relates to the book is generating new business and the myths that are, some of the methodologies that are forced upon sales professionals in order to gain new business. And a lot of it is, the quote unquote cold calling aspect of it.
Yeah. So, and you're talking about the turnover in sales.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you just think of terms of new salespeople coming into the work, place or workforce, those myths of the cold calling probably deter them from ever getting in there in the first place. A lot of them, just because of this, I hate cold calling piece to it.
Yeah, but in a way you're right, but they don't know anything else. So when I say, I'm speaking in general terms.
Yeah.
So
sure.
they figure that that's the only thing to do. That's all that can be done. I'm not being told by management or my trainers a different way to prospect. So this is it, unless you come up with something else. Let me step back and I'll give you a real good description. I've been in sales 40 years. A lot of the time was as a quote unquote consultant, but it was more of an independent contractor. They use the fancy term consultant, but I would be hired by organizations to generate new business in some way, whether it's selling a new product, opening a new territory, or even a lot of the times I've done data analysis to look for revenue where it wasn't there before. But I was always on timelines. I was in like a 6-month contract. And in general in sales, you're always on a deadline. So you have to prospect for new business in the ways that can meet those deadlines. And if you can't do it that way, especially when I was on a contract, I had to come up with ways to produce faster. And I did it, they go back to the New York thing. It was all intuition and my wits to generate new business in a different way, which I've created in the book. And that's how I was able to produce appointments and then sales faster within the 6-month period. But what was happening is the organization, there's other aspects, sales obstacles within an organization that can hurt the business as well as the profession, which also affect salesperson's time in generating business. So the methodology itself sometimes cannot be the way to just succeed, because you have to overcome other obstacles, which I've labeled in the book. So what I did is eventually, after doing this, I decided, let me put my methodology down in writing in a formalized process, and then other salespeople can use this. And a step-by-step on how to prospect for new business. And if you could just think of, I thought it was going to take me 6 months, and it went on for years, literally for years, because, to write down how to do something step-by-step, that intricate, to get every aspect of it right, it's very detailed and laborious. But in addition to creating new things for the book, it's certainly my own terminology for it, et cetera. So, as I was doing it, it became a cathartic experience, because I was thinking back of all the sales positions I've had and the consulting positions. And I realized that a lot of these 90+% of them no longer exist. And none of them are gone because of a lack of sales. Okay, it's all due to, as I put in the book, they were decisioned into the grave. So you couldn't blame lack of sales for the business either getting gobbled up or going out of business. So the book turned into a commentary on the problems with sales. I offer solutions. As one of the solutions, I created tactical prospecting, which is a way to generate new business. And then lastly, relating back to the 100 doors a day, I created my own method, equations to generate metrics, productivity metrics. And it gets away from all the pie in the sky superficial numbers that are thrown at salespeople. It breaks it down literally in terms of how much are you going to produce within an hour period of time as compared to what you're forced to do. So it's a whole package of, if I don't know what I'm dealing with to get into sales, like that new salesperson you talked about who's coming into the business, this will give them the reality. This is what you're going to go up against, and this is how to overcome it.
Right. Kind of real world, rubber
It's
meets
very
the road
real world
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love the term tactical prospecting, and partly it's because, admittedly, I love when you throw tactical in front of anything, like tactical vest or tactical, whatever. I know it's a different type of tactics, but
Right.
but anyways, I like the sound of that. Can you, and obviously strategies versus tactics, right? Tactics are kind of, again, that rubber meets the road piece, which you're actually doing. Can you give us kind of maybe a little example without giving away the farm here, of tactical prospecting?
And I'm so glad you said that, because I was very pointed in using the term tactic, because it's funny. Strategy in sales is just something that management comes up with that they can blame on you when it fails. So it's an idea. And a lot of the times I worked in organizations where they have competing ideas operating at the same time. And that's a strategy. It's like, look, I came up with a strategy and let's give it a shot. Oh, it didn't work. Meaning the management, I don't suffer, you do. So tactic is actually implementing something, the idea that's implemented. And that's why. So stepping back a moment, the big difference in my prospecting methodology, and basically tactical prospecting is the foundation, and what I call the alliance process is built on the foundation. Now, the foundation piece is, let's assume you're that new salesperson. You go into a new company, you learn the product, and you say, okay, here's the target customer for that product. And you get a list of 100 businesses, and you go after a business directly. You try and communicate with them any way possible. With tactical prospecting, you're hunting for people who have access to targets, those businesses. So you get an exponential type of factoring. And I'll give you an example. If I'm that salesperson, get a list of 100 businesses, and I call on 100 businesses, and maybe I'll get, and I'm going to be generous, 5 appointments out of it. Okay, so I put all that time into contacting 100 businesses. If you do tactical prospecting, you're identifying an individual who has a complementary decision maker that they sell to. And this could be anyone. It could be another salesperson. It could be an IT business, IT consulting business, where there's an overlap of benefits. So I can identify, if I'm selling a product that's sold to an IT decision maker, and I engage an IT business, a consulting business, they've got an existing book of business already they're selling to, as well as any potential prospects. And I bind with him or her, and I explain the product, and right in there in their mindset, their brain works, or they go through their physical database and they say, you know what? Of my 300 customers, my 100 customers, these 5 are a good match for you. And then they bring you to them. And I've knocked 95% of my time out the window, because I'm not wasting my time with the randomization aspect. Now imagine you've got connections or relationships, which I call allies, with 3 or 4 or 5 of these. Then I'm putting my time into already getting appointments with these customers that knock out any potential obstacles that are formed by cold calling.
Right. And it's a little bit like referrals, but not. It's because it's specific people that are non-competing and complementary, like you were saying.
Here's the phraseology, the philosophy. Familiarity breeds comfort. And when you have a familiarity where somebody vouches for me because I already have an alliance relationship with them, then all of those, let's say there's 10 obstacles that are just inherited with other types of prospects, they're knocked out. Yeah. I don't have to get by a gatekeeper. They don't have to vet me. They don't have to, know that they can trust the product, the company, et cetera. That's all taken care of.
Yeah. The trust is really high with that
100%.
That entry, that doorway in. Now, I'm curious, Mike. Do the people, those alliances, I'm going to guess you reciprocate and you are able to kind of help them out in a similar way.
100%. There's a mechanism, and this is some of the terminology I had to come up with, because like I said, all of this was intuition until I said, okay, if I'm going to formalize this, I need formal terms. There's something called anchor seeding and counterweighing. And anchor seeding is once you form that relationship, you formed an ally, and there's ways I explain how you determine who is and isn't an ally, determine if they have a business development mindset. Now, the first thing you do when you form the relationship is you anchor seed, meaning you give them something of value. It could be a piece of information, it could be an account, it could be a potential prospect. You're immediately feeding the relationship, you're anchor seeding. Now, what that does is, first of all, it gets it going so it doesn't die on the vine. But more importantly, it's a monitoring aspect of the ally. They have to counterweigh. And if they reciprocate, then you've got a good, strong relationship. Right. And that's kind of like a monitoring mechanism. The beauty of this is with the business development mindset of an individual is and I'm sure you've run across people like this. It doesn't have to be a salesperson either. It could be your gardener. It could be anyone you run into. They just have a good brain for looking for opportunity. There's several different mechanisms that can be used to generate more business because you're both on the same page in knowing and identifying and engaging opportunities. And then it just becomes exponential in terms of the amount of business you can generate.
Right. I mean, and in some ways you might be asking those people that you're aligned with about other people like them that provide leverage. So you can get leverage on top of leverage in a sense. So
100%. And like if I have an ally who walks me into one of their customers, that customer can become an ally also.
Sure.
If they have the same mentality. And then that's how, and it's funny because if I have to call on 100 a day, which can't be done. So, I can't stand that phrase. But if I call on 100 a day, if I have 5 allies and they have 100 apiece and they're stronger, how long does it take me to interact with 5 allies where they can do the work for you? I have something in there in terms of, because it all relates to time. And the fact that a sales professional's time is gobbled up by everything under the sun to the point where they can't succeed. So if I have these allies, it reduces the net time expenditure to almost zero, virtually zero, I put it. And you say, well, how can that be? Because they're bringing the prospect to you because they know about what you want. So you're not wasting the time calling on 100 random people and hoping that the timing is right where they need your product at the same time you knock on the door. And I mean literally knock on the door, because if they decide an hour after or an hour before that they needed it and you're not there, then the timing's lost. So
there's something, Mike, you said about the business development mindset, right? And you're saying if they have the business development mindset, do you have, I don't know, like not a test, but like a little thing that you use on people so you go, oh yeah, they're going to be good, right? Like you're able to kind of figure that out on the front end.
There's 3 principles to the business development mindset, and this is how you determine within a person. And you can form a metric to figure this out. But generally, can they identify an opportunity? Can they engage an opportunity? And can they negotiate the opportunity? And negotiate doesn't mean business. It means figure out a way to make that opportunity valuable to them in terms of offering them something of value, that type of negotiation. And let me tell you, 4 decades of doing this, you'd be amazed at people in the profession who couldn't identify an opportunity literally when it's handed to them. And I've handed leads and prospects and they just don't know what to do with it. And I'm talking people in sales, but they do survive because they have some of these other advantages that I name in the book that give them an advantage over a typical or an untenured sales profession.
Okay. So I mean, for it to work, for the system to work, they have to be able to, grasp onto those opportunities and understand the potential, and then to be able to feed it back and forth, right? So that's
100%.
Okay.
Because the key thing let me just one more thing with that is,
for sure,
if there's a lot of time, not in what I teach in the book, but generally speaking, like you mentioned, referrals. even if you have the best intentions at heart, people don't know how to do that typically because they're not taught, certainly in training. So you may think that somebody has a business development mindset and they are just completely wasting your time. And I have some humorous little indicators, like if they say go to the if you remember the yellow pages, look it up in the yellow pages, or what you should do, go on Google, or it's emptiness like that.
Yeah.
So
that's a hint that they don't have a business development mindset.
Yeah, and those are more humorous hints. I do have metrics, but it's
Okay. Well, and you just said metrics. I know we talked about data insights, finding revenue. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that, obviously, for people who can find revenue, that's an advantageous thing to be able to do.
Some of the positions I had in consulting positions were to do data analyses. A good example, there was a franchise, it was a wireless mobility franchise, and I got recommended to this by another ally, and they thought that they weren't getting the right residual commission from the carrier, and they were sure of it 100%. I'm talking about the franchise owners. So there was 250, and I spoke to management. They told me what they thought the problem was. And by the way, in my consulting, this is very interesting. They'll always explain to me what they think the problem is, the CEOs, the executives, and 9 times out of 10, it's not even close to what they thought it was. And a lot of the times, it was a very simple solution once you identify the problem. So, but in this case, you can do things just with the random samples. I didn't need 250 stores worth of data. I said, give me 10 stores worth of data randomly. I analyzed it, and it turned out that a certain plan that was being sold more often than not wasn't commissionable. There were other minor issues to it. But when I said this one plan, I asked a couple of the owners, how many of these do you think you sell a month? And they would say 5%, and it was over 60. And it wasn't a commissional thing because the industry changed and these plans were being sold more. So within a 2-week period, I gained, I increased their revenue 30% annually with the 2 weeks of just looking at the data.
Interesting.
And it was all sitting there.
Yeah, just right in there. It's funny, we can measure so many things these days, right? The data and the analytics, and yet it can still be misplaced. We talk to a lot of people, on the marketing side of things, talking about these vanity metrics, right? We're measuring things that make us look good, but it's not actually driving the needle, down the road.
I put in the book as it relates to that, because it's really between the eyes, the reality of the sales profession. And I said, data is only used, the metrics are only used to punish somebody, the salesperson.
Right. Yeah. Put pressure on them and, make them do the job. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Because I always use the story that this was related to me, but I was selling a product, and you had a geographic territory, and through a database, you can analyze and really pick out the potential prospects in terms of customer size, what they were in industry, and these were the ones that bought this product. And I had 2,000 businesses in the territory that I could work on and sell. And the manager kept saying, you got to knock on 100 doors a day. That's the only way to do it. And I said, I'll be done in 20 days if I could do that. Because I only have 2. Then what do I do? And they don't know what to say. So they come up with the gobbledygook and say, well, then you start all over again. I said, you mean the first day of the new month, I'm going to go knock on the same door I knocked on a month earlier where they didn't want the product? And that's where the metrics just,
Yeah. That's, and things have changed, right? And buyers have evolved. Everything has changed. Of course, we here like to talk about how do we engage those customers? How do we grab their attention? How do we make them pay attention? Do you have any comments or tactics or suggestions for people out there who want to evolve and try to compete in this world of noise that we're living in?
This is going to make probably every sales trainer cringe, and this is in the book as well. 90% of the deal is done through the prospecting. The last 10% is just negotiation. And I've been asked by different people, it's like, what do you think about this selling technique or this selling technique? I said, I don't teach or discuss techniques once you're in front of the customer, because I can't anticipate every obstacle. So I can't train every solution. And I always say this: sales and this is a big thing that's removed from sales, is just the fact that you're actually trying to do business. You're not trying to fool them into calling you back, or motivate them into it. You're trying to do business with a business person, if you think about that. And a good sales professional just is able to think on his feet, because I can't figure out everything that's going to happen when you're in front of the customer. And it's funny, when you go through training, to say it's tertiary, that the prospecting piece is an understatement. They always start the training when you're sitting in front of the customer.
True.
Never,
That's true.
how did I get there in the first place? How do I get in front of the customer? And if they do touch upon that, and I've been through ones which are prospecting, it's just repackaged cold calling. Because like you said, things change and evolve. I used to be able to get on the phone years ago, and again, in my 40 years, and I'd get somebody on the phone, and I may be able to schmooze a gatekeeper or such, but 99 out of 100 times, you're going to get a voicemail. So what do? They say, okay, I'm going to tell you what kind of voicemail to leave and how to, and then they come up with all this craziness on what to say in the voicemail. And then forget about New York. If you had to go knock on doors, you couldn't get past the lobby anymore with security. So that's one of the reasons you have to come up with a different angle. But it's more importantly for time. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I love the idea that 90% is done, by the prospecting, because if you're in front of a customer who has a need, right, you've prospected properly, then everything should be rolling forward pretty smoothly, right? We shouldn't have to deal with all the snags and the different things. So
100%. And that's the whole point of, when you use an ally, then all those obstacles are removed, because all the vetting and the trust is established. And like I said, the last 10% is just a negotiation. Now, in terms of trust, you have to, do what what you say you can do. Otherwise, the trust is lost, and then there's no shot.
One of the things we do in some of our trainings, when we talk about creating engagement, there's different engagement drivers we talk about. And one of them being authority, or trust in this case, right? The fact that you are introduced by someone else who's a trusted, known commodity, that is going to make people pay attention. And then the relevance of the problem that you're solving. You're already hitting on two very strong engagement drivers through your, what's your methodology called? The alliance?
The alliance process.
Alliance process,
Tactical prospecting. You can think of it almost as a philosophy. And then because you're looking to hunt for people, not businesses, when you start your prospecting. Who can help me get into a target? And a target would be a piece of information. But in terms of sitting in front of a customer, this is interesting in terms of the engagement. And I've done this. This is funny. I fool my wife a lot, because she'll say, how can you tell somebody on the phone that you can do this? You haven't even started working for the company yet. And I said, I don't need to know the product. Well, I do eventually. But if I know my product and I sit in front of a customer for the first time, one of the great engagement entrance statements is and I've done this a million times in my career. Give me an overview of your business. Can you give me a 30-second overview of your business? And they do that. Now, you don't know their business, you know your product, and they know their business. So when they're telling you about their business, now you're relating it to the value prop of your product, and you know how to apply it. Instead of me starting the talking and telling them what my company can do and what my product can do, you don't even know how it relates. And any business owner or executive, they always want to talk about it. And a lot of the times, like I said, a very high percentage, they'll tell you what the problem is. And now you're related to the solution. It's funny, great story. And I actually brought this up recently, how thinking on your feet and this type of thing. When I was working in an organization, it was really my first sales position. And it was in New York, and it was the second largest real estate company in New York. They managed 300 buildings rather. And each building was a separate entity. If you know how real estate works, it's like a separate corporation for every building. And we were a smaller company. So I was probably the sixth one in. And it's a New Yorker, chief operating officer. And I pretty much walked in, and he said, okay, look, I don't want to hear anything. He said, I'll tell you what you need. He said, if you can, of course, if the product worked, but he said, if you can generate a separate bill for each building, and the product works, then you pretty much have a sale. Now, I didn't know. I was working at the company a month. And if all these large organizations told them they couldn't, I'm like, I don't know, can I? And I just thought about it for a minute. And I said, you know what? I didn't say this out loud. This is, the split second where your mind works. And And I said, well, if I was a Superman salesperson and I sold 300 businesses in a month, that would be 300 separate bills. So there's really no difference. So I said, of course we can. And my billing department went crazy until I explained to them the whole thing. But give you an idea, 50 units was a month, was a quota for a month, and I sold 600 with that deal.
Well, you're going after the whales, right? Going after the right accounts in that sense. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
600 units. I'll generate a separate bill myself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You could do it yourself just to make it. So Mike, your book, The Sales Professional Survival Guide, where can people buy that? On Amazon, I'm guessing, or where can people
Amazon and every platform, MikeLaRusso.com. I have my own website, and it's under the Michelson Group. That's my consulting company. Okay. And in terms of anything that it's targeted for sales students, and I mean that generically because that's both entry-level students in college because they're sales degrees, as well as high-level executives who need to know exactly what's going on in their sales environment and a different way to look at their sales environment, which is greatly needed. And that's what this book and my teachings provide.
Wow, excellent. I'm going to pick it up myself. You know what ends up happening with the podcast guests I have on? I just end up buying a lot of books, but it's so good because I learned so much, and then I'm like, that does sound good. I'm going to have to do that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Hey,
so I appreciate you coming on.
I don't send it before the podcast.
Oh, well, more. That's all right. That's all right. It's good. It's all good. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your expertise with us.
Andrews, I had a great time. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode. And remember, until next time, stay engaged. Thank you so much for listening to Engaging Personalities. If you believe this world needs more engagement and you're an industry leader or you have an interesting take on rehumanizing business, go to go.engagify.ai/podcast-guest to apply and come on the show. If you got something out of this interview, do you mind sharing it on your social media? Just grab a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show. Include the hashtag Engaging Personalities. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episode, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, engagify.ai, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening and stay engaged.